Jake Reiner had been telling himself that this Christmas would be different. Not perfect, just different. A quiet return to the Brentwood house, where distance could finally soften, and old tension might fade under warm lights and familiar voices. He imagined 2 chairs at the table filled again, his father's steady presence, his mother's gentle rhythm, a family moment that could exist without fear hovering over every silence. Then December 14th arrived and erased the future in a single phone call. Rob Reiner and Michelle were gone inside their own home, and the shock did not even have time to settle before a second blow landed because the name attached to the case was not a stranger, not an intruder, but Jake's own brother. In the space of minutes, grief collided with disbelief, and disbelief curdled into something darker, the kind of realization you do not say out loud because saying it makes it real. Days later, under studio lights, Jake did what the Reiners had spent years avoiding. He spoke the sentence that sounded like betrayal and warning at the same time. He said he had tried to stop this. He said he had warned them, and once those words were out, there was no way to put the family back together again. Before we go any further, take a moment and let me know where you're watching from right now in the comments. These stories travel farther than we realize, and what comes next reveals a truth that was never meant to be spoken out loud. Because I'm a snail, and I'm never going to fail. And you know what? You're going to have to bail me out of jail. Everybody runs into this at some point with a child where you want to will things to be true, right? That you think you can command things to happen, and you can't. And in the most insecure you'll feel, the most vulnerable you'll feel as a parent is knowing there are some things that are outside of your control. From the outside, the Reiner household looked balanced, creative, and unusually close. Inside, Jake learned early that balance did not mean equality. He was the older brother, the steady one, the child who caused no problems. Nick was different, more fragile, more unpredictable, and because of that, more protected. Jake has spoken about growing up with the quiet understanding that his role was to absorb discomfort so the house could stay calm. When Nick struggled, the room adjusted around him. Conversations softened. Plans changed. Attention shifted. Jake did not protest because he sensed the fear beneath it all. His parents were not choosing favorites out of preference. They were responding to vulnerability, to the constant worry that Nick might fall apart if handled too firmly. Over time, that fear shaped everything. Mistakes were explained away. Outbursts were reframed as phases. Each incident was treated as temporary, something love and patience would eventually smooth over. Jake watched this pattern repeat and learned what was expected of him. Be understanding. Be quiet. Be strong enough for everyone else. The cost of that role was invisible at first. It showed up as silence, as the habit of stepping back. Jake has said that the most painful part was not that Nick received more care, but that the family never questioned whether constant protection was helping or quietly making things worse. What lingered beneath his words was a deeper conflict. If one child is always shielded, who bears the weight when that shield begins to crack? And at what point does protection stop being love and start becoming permission? The first signs did not arrive as a crisis. They came quietly, easy to dismiss if you wanted to believe everything was still under control. Jake noticed changes in Nick when he was still a teenager, shifts in mood that lasted longer than they should have. Conversations shortened. Decisions were filtered through one question that never needed to be spoken. What if Nick reacts badly? Holidays, dinners, even ordinary evenings carried an undercurrent of tension that never fully lifted. Jake could feel it in the way his parents moved through their own home, alert rather than relaxed, present but never at ease. At some point he realized they were no longer living in the moment. They were surviving from one crisis to the next, measuring success by what did not go wrong. His parents still loved deeply. It required constant vigilance, constant adjustment, constant sacrifice. Jake saw the fatigue settling into them, the kind that does not come from age, but from years of carrying fear without release. That was when a different question began to haunt him. If his parents were spending all their energy trying to save Nick, what would happen when they had nothing left to give? And more painfully, was anyone watching closely enough to see that they were the ones slipping toward the edge? Jake eventually understood that staying close meant being pulled into a cycle he could not control. So he chose distance, not as rejection, but as preservation. While the Reiner name carried weight in Hollywood, He moved in the opposite direction towards structure, deadlines, and facts that could be verified. Journalism offered him something his home life no longer did: clear rules, clear outcomes, truth that did not shift to protect anyone. He trained himself to stand behind the story instead of inside it. Local stations first, long hours, unglamorous assignments, the kind of work where credibility had to be earned daily. In newsrooms, chaos followed a pattern. You responded, you reported, you moved on. For a while, that rhythm kept him steady. It gave him the illusion that if he stayed disciplined enough, life would stop testing him personally. But his parents were gone. The house that held every version of his childhood had become a place of finality. Before grief could settle, reality fractured again when he learned who was being named in connection with what happened. The image he had rehearsed for months collapsed into something unrecognizable. 2 empty chairs replaced the reunion he had been holding on to. When he reached his sister, there were no explanations to offer. They did not speak. They held each other, absorbing a loss that felt too large to contain. What remained was not just grief, but the unbearable awareness that the moment he thought would heal everything had arrived as a permanent ending. 3 months before everything collapsed, Jake had already felt the unease tightening in his chest. When he learned that Nick wanted to move back into the Brentwood house, the reaction was immediate and physical. Not anger, not resentment, but fear sharp enough to keep him awake at night. He did not frame it as a disagreement. He framed it as a warning. Jake told his parents plainly that he did not feel safe. He said he was afraid that something irreversible could happen if the boundaries they had avoided for years remained blurred. He urged them to slow down, to create distance, to protect themselves even if it felt cruel. The words did not come easily. They carried the weight of a son, asking his parents to do something that went against their instincts. His parents listened, but they did not change course. Love guided them as it always had. They believed that welcoming Nick back was an act of hope, a chance to stabilize him, a way to prove that family did not abandon its own. Jake heard the calm in his father's voice, the reassurance in his mother's, and felt the dread deepen rather than lift. After the tragedy, that conversation became a loop he could not escape. He replayed every sentence, every pause, ever, and pretending otherwise would cost him whatever was left of himself. What followed was not outrage or spectacle. It was something heavier. Viewers who watched Jake speak did not argue about guilt or innocence. They sat in silence, absorbing the kind of truth that feels too private to witness. Messages arrived slowly, not in bursts, but in confessions. People wrote that they could not finish watching in one sitting. Others said they turned the television off, then turned it back on minutes later because they could not walk away. Jake did not present himself as a hero or a victim. He appeared as a man stripped of certainty, admitting that love had not been enough and that warnings had not saved the people he loved most. That honesty unsettled people because it offered no comfort. It suggested that even with resources, attention, and relentless care, families can still lose control. The story lingered because it refused to resolve cleanly. Jake did not claim he was right. He did not say his parents were wrong. He left the question open, suspended between compassion and consequence. At what point does protecting someone become dangerous? And how many chances can love afford before it turns into denial? In the end, what remained was not a lesson, but a weight, a reminder that some warnings do not get repeated, and some seasons never return the way we imagine them. The chairs at that table will stay empty, and Jake will live with the knowledge that seeing the danger coming does not guarantee the power to stop it. That discomfort is where this story ends. Not with answers, but with a silence that asks each viewer what they would have done and whether they would recognize the moment when love alone is no longer enough. Before you leave, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. If you had seen the danger coming, would you have chosen love the way they did?